Today we're going to be trying to figure out the best and the worst episode of Better Call Saul. This is obviously going to be a very subjective thing, so be sure to drop your own thoughts and personal picks too, down below, as this is going to largely be based on my own opinion. I've got to say though, this one was really tough. There are many contenders for the best episode of the show. For me, it comes down to quite a few, to be honest. 109, Pimento, 305, Chicanery, 409, Vida Sane, 410, Winner, 508, Bagman, 509, Bad Choice Road, 603, Rock and Hard Place, 607, Plan and Execution, and 609, Fun and Games. We're going to come back to these later though. There's not so many when it comes to the worst, which we'll address first. I don't believe there are any bad episodes of Better Call Saul. At most, there are some weaker episodes. Better Call Saul's IMDb scores never dip below an 8, which I would personally consider as a universal sign that it doesn't really have a bad episode. There's actually two main episodes that I feel are the weakest of the show though, and they're the two I feel are a bit tonally off. A bit too strange maybe, a bit too out there. They're surprisingly far apart too, these two being 105 Alpine Shepherd Boy and 605 Black and Blue. There's a few other episodes that have gotten low audience ratings, such as 205 Rebecca, 301 Mabel, 307 Expenses, and 401 Smoke, so I want to cover all of those quickly too, and sort of justify why I don't consider each of them the weakest episode. I have a lot of respect for the episode Rebecca, because I think it did an amazing job at fleshing out Kim as a character, and really showing us what she was about. It was the first time in this series she got some serious soul focus. There's also great scenes in this episode, like the one between Kim and Chuck, discussing Jimmy stealing from their parents. I'm also a personal fan of her sticky note montage scene. Mabel is the opener to season 3, and I think this one has a low rating because of the extended scenes of Mike pulling apart the car, and the slower lawyer side of things too. It is a slow episode, sure, but I think it's solid as a season opener, and I personally have no issue with it. The finding of the tracker in the gas cap is this almost eerie moment, and I quite enjoy how Mike then uses it to track who was tracking him. Expenses is a fairly depressing episode, post-chicanery, where Jimmy attempts to sell off his ad space, along with doing community service. It feels quite similar to an episode like Breaking Bad's Down. Again though, I quite like this episode. It's important to have these low moments for the characters sometimes, even if they aren't fun to watch. We get another appearance of Daniel Wormold, and we also get the incredibly important scene of Jimmy getting Chuck's insurance adjusted. Quite an underrated one, I think. Finally, Smoke is pretty up there for me for some of my favourite underdog episodes. It's a quiet and fairly subtle episode, and a slightly confusing one even. But there's so much that's great about this episode. I might even have to make a separate video on it, because I personally think this episode is silently very strong, and is one of the best examples of saying a lot without saying anything. Okay, so back to Alpine Shepherd Boy and Black and Blue. These two episodes are from season 1 and season 6, and both feature scenes that just feel a bit odd. I do quite enjoy watching the scenes, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel they kind of took me out of the show a bit in terms of immersion. Alpine Shepherd Boy has the montage of new clients that Jimmy is visiting after he receives a lot of attention from his billboard stunt. We get a variety of wacky characters. We get the talking toilet man, who Jimmy is pretty disturbed by. We get a scene with a very rich guy who wants to secede from the US. He offers Jimmy his own personal currency that he plans to use for his own state. Both of these are things I can actually believe happening, but there's something that feels just tonally wrong here for me. It's one of those things that just doesn't quite work for me. This kind of humour feels like it very much found its way out of the show for the most part, remaining in far more subtle and suitable ways. I think it's just one of those things in season 1 that wasn't quite right, but they wanted to try it out. I don't hate it or anything, it just doesn't feel right for the broader show to me. The episode Alpine Shepherd Boy as a whole is a fairly slow one, with cuts between Chuck in the hospital and scenes with Jimmy finding his way into elder law. We get important insights into Chuck's illness, with a doctor speculating that his illness is mental rather than physical. Good plot movement, but I think the pairing of the humour with the quite serious scenes can feel quite jarring. Some of the scenes can also feel a little too spoon-feedy for this series. The main weakness of Black and Blue is where it's situated within the season, I think. One issue I think season 6 definitely had was that it felt very stop-start. The first 3 episodes are quite fast-paced and dramatic. The following 3 slow down considerably. Then we're thrown back into speed for another 3, then are left with a final 4 of gradually increasing pace and tension. There were a lot of whiplash moments, so with Black and Blue being in the midst of this slower section, I think it did definitely suffer. Let's go through the episode. We get a scene where Jimmy and Kim wake up early in the morning, both concerned about Lalo's whereabouts, still fearful he may come back. We get Gus formulating his gun in the super lab plan when he offers a man some spice curls. Howard and Cliff visit the Sandpiper residence, and we get a scene between them discussing what Cliff saw in Hit and Run. We get the opening of Saul's office, and the return of Francesca. We get a return of Viola too, with Kim getting information off of her. Saul then makes a house call to a HO ward, and he has a fight with Howard. Gus then scrubs a bathtub with a toothbrush, before setting up the gun in the lab. Finally, we have the reintroduction of Lalo, who visits Marguerite Ziegler, finding Werner's in-case rule given to him by his boys, that we see constructed at the start of the episode. One of the main issues with this episode is both how we as the audience are left out of things, but also how we're in the know on things. The scene where Jimmy and Kim are up early out of fear of Lalo's return doesn't hold much weight, because 1, we already know he isn't coming north for them, and 2, we already know he isn't dead. There's only a small amount of tension really, in that Kim doesn't tell Jimmy what Mike told her. The Gus scenes at Poyos and with the toothbrush are scenes to further show his paranoia, and they sure do that. But they're just not the most engaging, to be honest, for the similar reason of us knowing that Lalo isn't coming for him. Yet at least. The planting of the gun in the lab is important, but for me takes up a little too much time. Another thing we're left out of is Jimmy and Kim's plan. We don't really know what's going on, with some mild intrigue from Kim's usage of Viola to get the name of the judge. There's 2 sections of this episode that feel tonally odd too. These 2 being the fight and the Germany part. It's weirdly the way these 2 are shot and the choreography, I suppose. The concept of the fight and Lalo going to Germany aren't things that are far-fetched to me, but the way they're executed never quite sat right. The fight feels very fake, I suppose. It looks over-choreographed to me, and there's moments where there's these big pauses before someone gets hit. The movement feels janky, and it feels like they tried to make the 2 of them look overly amateur, to the point they seem near incompetent. It's one of very few scenes in the show that look a bit fake in terms of action. Another example being the Mike scene in season 5 when he fights those guys and gets stabbed. That may just be me though. The Lalo scene I actually enjoyed, but I thought it went on a bit too long, and despite him holding a gun out during the house part, it didn't feel particularly tense, largely because we know Lalo can't make a scene. The way he silently escapes through a small upper floor window also felt like a little too much, and makes Lalo feel almost supernatural. Even when he did the vent thing, there was some noise. Here he's like completely silent, and it's this like tiny window. All round it's fairly petty criticisms, to be honest, but I think that goes to show the quality of the show. It's a tough choice really, but my pick for the weakest episode I think is probably Black and Blue. It definitely does some good setup, and I don't mind the episode as much now knowing how things unfold. Again, I think season 6's odd structure and pacing at times really put Black and Blue in a bad light. This, along with many of the events being in the audience's knowledge, but not in the characters, which can feel quite frustrating. Alright, best episode time. My picks were Pimento, Chicanery, Vida Sane, Winner, Bagman, Bad Choice Road, Rock and Hard Place, Plan and Execution, and Fun and Games. All amazing episodes. Pimento is an incredible episode from the first season, and to this day has one of the best moments. That being the chimp with a machine gun line from Chuck. Jimmy discovering Chuck's betrayal is just heartbreaking, and the acting is incredible from both Odenkirk and McKeon. The cartel side is also great, with Mike's whole pimento cheese routine, and his talk with Price. Chicanery is an episode which focuses solely on the lawyer side of things, with an entire episode dedicated to the trial between Jimmy and Chuck, culminating in one of the best moments in the series, of the battery in the pocket, and the consequential chicanery speech. It's an amazing climax to the back and forth between the two, and it really impressively shows how intense an episode solely focused around talking can be. One of my personal favourites, and an episode that gives so much payoff to one of the greatest relationships of the show, of Chuck and Jimmy. Vida Sane is an episode that contains my favourite scene of the series, which is the one on the car park roof between Jimmy and Kim, where they discuss Jimmy's reinstatement hearing, and it all blows up after Kim asks why he didn't mention Chuck. It's my favourite conversation of the series, and is one of the biggest climaxes in their relationship throughout the show, and I love just how natural it all feels and flows together. The dialogue is incredibly layered and tight, and the whole scene is just amazing. We also have the opening scam of the episode, a great scene between Lalo and Hector, the blasting at the lab, the hearing itself, and finally, Werner's escape. The following episode, Winner, is a truly amazing episode, which culminates the events of Season 4, which really explored the origin of the Saul persona. It was also a great conclusion to the Chuck and Jimmy relationship. We have the two storylines of Jimmy attempting to get reinstated, and Mike hunting down Werner, Lalo close on his tail. We get the Christy Esposito scene, and the Saul Goodman at the end of the episode. Bagman I want to name drop as it's one of very few solely action focused episodes, and it's executed incredibly well. You feel fear for Jimmy despite knowing he lives. It's one that's very technically impressive, and the visceral and explosive nature of the action felt very fitting for BCS as a show. It felt messy and scary, and Bob Odenkirk's reactions to the things around him throughout this episode are really incredible. We also get some nice scenes between Mike and Jimmy, the two of them spending a longer than usual amount of time together. Bad Choice Road is an amazing episode. It has my favourite opener of the series, or one of my favourites at least, top 3, something like that. With the Something Stupid split screen and the two morning routines of Jimmy and Kim, ending when Jimmy gets the signal. It's a really heart-wrenching moment. I love all the aftermath of Bagman, with Jimmy turning in the money, Lalo telling Jimmy that Kim came to see him, all that stuff. The final scene is also one of the best of the series, with Kim standing up to Lalo, defending Jimmy's story that is slowly falling apart. Rock and Hard Place I wanted to mention purely because it's an incredible send-off for a BCS original character. Nacho was an amazing part of the show, and his send-off was perfect, I thought. Sad, but it felt real, intense, and almost operatic. Fun and Games is a great emotional conclusion to the series, with many great scenes. It has maybe my favourite Mike scene, between Manuel and Mike, discussing Nacho, and the idea of justice. It has one of my favourite Gus scenes, with him at the bar. Then of course it has the great Jimmy and Kim side of the story, a distressing, but utterly enthralling episode. Finally, Plan and Execution is widely considered the best, and is currently the highest rated episode of the series. It's a great episode and takes all of the great elements from many of the best episodes and combines them all together, all ending with a hugely impactful bang. It's amazing how this episode goes from this light-hearted tone at the start, with the funny film crew, to the absolutely harrowing end, as Howard hits the floor. Everything in between is very engaging, with the episode focusing around one of the major continuous plot lines of BCS, being the Sandpiper settlement. Incredible episode. My top 3 comes down to 305 Chicanery, 410 Winner, and 607 Plan and Execution. However, we do have to pick a best episode, so my pick for the best episode of Better Call Saul is 410 Winner. This episode to me captures everything great about the series, for both the lawyering side and the cartel side. It's like a perfect balance of each, with intensity on both sides. It also has my favourite episode ending out of all of the episodes of the series. That final moment of Jimmy turning around and saying, "Saul Goodman," is just heartbreaking, and was a jaw-drop moment for me when watching the episode, second only to potentially 607's ending, which is hard not to jaw-drop on. Winner has possibly the most emotion of any episode also. Despite its longer than usual length, it's so dense throughout in emotion, and every scene feels meaningful and powerful. This episode has my favourite opener out of any, with its karaoke scene, where Chuck and Jimmy sing "The Winner Takes It All" by ABBA. Not only is the song very fitting for their relationship, but also the episode as a whole. It may even be my favourite sequence in the whole show. It's moments like this which just leave you so devastated, especially with Jimmy at the end of the episode, letting out this seemingly heartfelt speech, only to turn around and confess it was all for show. Jimmy and Chuck's conflict and their relationship was always really the heart and driving force of the show, and I think this moment in the courtroom when he gets reinstated is potentially the show's most important event. As cheesy as it is to say, I truly believe this episode was the birth of Saul Goodman, the moment Jimmy committed to the mask. On the cartel side, we have the hunt for Werner, and it's the first episode we get some true Lalo craziness as he attempts to find out what is going on. There's great scenes like when Lalo talks to Werner, and he guesses that Mike is on the other end. There's interesting yet simple action, like the parking lot chase, and everything that goes down at the travel wire. The final scene with Werner is probably up there for the saddest Mike scenes, just below the ones in 5-0 and Fun and Games. This is a moment that truly changes Mike into the person we know in Breaking Bad. It's a very big transitional episode for Mike and Jimmy, and season 4 is easily the clearest transitional season also. So I think it really caps it off nicely. The other great thing about this episode is that it contains probably the best scam Jimmy and Kim ever pulled, which is Jimmy's reinstatement. It's cunning, it's dark, and it's bittersweet. Again, particularly with the ending. To me, Winner is an absolutely masterful episode, and my favourite of the show. Well, that's gonna do it. I hope you enjoyed, and of course please do drop your own thoughts on the best and the worst episode down below. Thanks for watching.
It's all good, man.